I'm Kara, and my brother Leo warned me never to touch it. But when I saw the small bronze figurine sitting alone on the thrift store shelf, I couldn't resist. I didn't know then that a single, stolen coin could change everything, could follow me home, watch me, and wait. What happened next was something neither of us could have imagined, and it's been counting ever since. I found it in a dusty corner of the thrift store, wedged between stacks of cracked teacups and yellowed books. It was a small figurine, no taller than my palm, made of bronze that had dulled with age. A man holding a coin, nothing extraordinary at first glance, but there was something about it that made me pause. Its eyes, tiny and uneven, seemed almost alive, catching the dim light in a way that made me feel watched. I tilted it in my hands, running a finger over its rough edges. I didn't know why, but I felt a strange pull toward it, like it was calling me, waiting for me to take it home. The price tag was cheap, barely a few dollars, and I told myself that was reason enough to buy it. The store was unusually quiet that day, except for the soft shuffle of my shoes against the wooden floorboards. I was the only customer, and the owner, an old woman with pale, wrinkled skin, watched me silently from behind the counter. Her gaze lingered longer than I expected, and for a moment I felt a twinge of unease. As if she knew something I didn't. I shook the feeling off. It was silly to think anyone could know what an old, forgotten figurine could do. I paid for it, tucked it into my bag, and left, ignoring the chill that ran down my spine as I stepped out into the fading daylight. At home, I placed the figurine on my desk. It looked harmless, almost childish, but I couldn't stop staring at it. The coin it held gleamed faintly, catching the light in a way that seemed unnatural. That night, I went to bed feeling restless, a tight knot of unease coiling in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was just a toy, a trinket with nothing to do with me, but sleep didn't come easily. Shadows in my room stretched and twisted, as though they had a life of their own, and every sound, the creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, like it was warning me to pay attention. I dreamt of someone standing at the foot of my bed, a figure shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see its face, only two hollow black eyes that seemed to bore into me. I tried to speak, to move, but my body refused. I could feel its gaze, cold and heavy, pressing down on me. And then it whispered something I couldn't hear, though the dread of its words clung to me when I woke. My sheets were soaked in sweat, and the figurine sat on my desk, exactly where I had left it, yet I felt certain it had moved closer. The next morning I noticed something strange. The coin the figurine held was gone. I hadn't touched it. I checked everywhere, the floor, the bed, the desk, but it had vanished. My stomach turned as a chill ran through me. Something wasn't right. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, that maybe I hadn't noticed it before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As the day went on, small things began to unsettle me. I could feel eyes on me, even when I was alone. Every time I turned around, I expected to see the shadowed figure from my dreams. The air in my apartment felt thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, watching. Then I started hearing it, the faintest sound, like coins dropping one by one on a hard surface. I told myself it was the building settling, my imagination, anything but what I feared. But the sound persisted, slow, deliberate, and always coming from the direction of my desk. By nightfall, I could no longer ignore the feeling that the figurine was alive. I sat on my bed, staring at it, heart hammering, and noticed that its tiny hand twitched slightly. My pulse quickened, and I could barely breathe. The room seemed colder now, darker, as if shadows had thickened around it, guarding it. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to run, to never look back. I reached for it, trembling, but froze when I realized the coin I had thought missing had reappeared in its hand, shiny and new, as if it had never been gone. That night, I lay awake, heart racing, listening to the faint, metallic clink of coins echoing through my apartment. I wanted to convince myself it was just a dream, that nothing could move on its own. But then I felt it, a small, cold pressure on my shoulder, light but unmistakable. I froze, afraid to breathe, and dared to glance at the figurine. Its eyes seemed brighter now, gleaming with a cruel intelligence I couldn't comprehend. I blinked, and the room felt impossibly still. The clinking stopped. I was alone, or so I thought. After that night, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow eyes of the figurine staring at me, glinting in the darkness. The clinking of coins grew louder, almost deliberate, echoing through the apartment in the quietest hours when even a whisper seemed impossible. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even during the day, shadows seemed to linger in the corners of my vision, stretching unnaturally, following me. I attempted to leave the apartment for a walk, thinking fresh air would calm me, but the unease clung like a second skin. Outside, the streets were empty in that late afternoon lull, the sunlight dull, almost muted. I felt certain something was following me, something that didn't belong in the sunlight, that thrived in the half-shadows. Every step I took felt heavy, and the faintest sound of metal against metal kept echoing in my ears. I could swear that if I turned quickly enough, I might glimpse it, watching, waiting. Returning home, I resolved to rid myself of the figurine. I placed it in a small cardboard box, taped it shut, and dragged it down to the garbage chute. I imagined it bouncing down the dark pipes, falling into the city's labyrinth of trash, where it could haunt no one else. I tried to tell myself I had done the right thing. I even felt a brief rush of relief, a thin veil of safety. But hours later I returned to my apartment, and there it was. The box had not been disturbed, yet the figurine sat upright on my desk, perfectly positioned, as if mocking me. My stomach dropped. I hadn't taken it out, hadn't touched it. The coin it held shimmered in the dim light, almost as if it had been polished in secret. My hands shook, my breath coming fast and shallow. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I realized I was trapped in a silent nightmare, one I could not wake from. That night the scratching started. Faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator, like tiny claws dragging across the floor. I sat in the darkness, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint the sound. It moved slowly, deliberately, tracing a circular pattern around my bed. My throat tightened, and a cold sweat ran down my spine. I traced the scratches with my fingers and noticed they led directly toward the figurine. It wasn't just a toy anymore. It was something alive, marking its territory, encircling me. I could not bring myself to sleep, nor could I leave the apartment. The city outside felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the small bronze figure that had chosen me. I started covering mirrors, afraid of catching its reflection, hoping it might reduce its influence. But every object in the apartment began to feel off, slightly tilted, shifted, as if rearranged by unseen hands. The air smelled heavier, thicker, as if the apartment itself were breathing with me, watching me. By the third night, the coin clinking turned into a slow, rhythmic tapping. Each sound hit my ears like a pulse, echoing inside my skull. I could feel the presence inching closer, not just at my desk, but in the corners, behind the walls. In the darkness under my bed, I could almost see movement there, small, shifting shadows that melted back into nothing whenever I dared to look. My chest ached from fear, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. I knew then that the figurine had a purpose, and that purpose involved me. I tried reasoning, telling myself I had stolen nothing, that it was just a statue, but the instinctive terror would not let me lie to myself. I could feel its eyes boring into me, demanding something I didn't understand. The apartment seemed alive with anticipation, the shadows stretching and bending in ways that defied logic. The scratching returned, louder now, dragging across the floor, circling me in an invisible pattern. I realized that it was not random, but precise, intentional, deliberate. And then, I saw it. A tiny shadow flickered beneath the figurine, like a whisper of movement. I froze, unable to breathe, heart hammering in my ears. Its eyes caught mine, brighter now, filled with something I could not name, a cruel intelligence that promised punishment. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. I knew, with a sick certainty, that whatever it was patient. It would wait for me, it would watch me, and it would come for me if I did not comply. That night, I lay awake in terror, unable to close my eyes. As the clinking of coins grew louder, and the shadow beneath the figurine shifted ever so slightly toward me, I was not alone, and I was no longer safe. Sleep had become a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel its presence pressing in from the corners of the room, heavy and relentless. Even in the daylight, the apartment felt wrong, unnatural. Shadows stretched farther than they should, corners seemed darker than physics allowed, and every object appeared slightly moved when I wasn't looking. The figurine was no longer just a small bronze statue, it was a living thing, patient and calculating, aware of every movement I made, every thought I dared to entertain. I tried to escape the apartment, thinking that a night away might break the cycle, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. On the street, I imagined shadows shifting, stretching, merging into forms that might be following me. Each clink of metal in my apartment echoed in my mind, persistent and mocking, even when I was blocks away. I couldn't focus. Every reflective surface seemed to hint at movement behind me, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. Returning home only deepened the suffocating terror. I had resolved to destroy the figurine to end whatever nightmare I had accidentally unleashed. I grabbed it and slammed it against the wall with all my strength. The bronze bounced slightly, then landed upright on my desk, unscathed. My hands shook violently, and I wanted to scream. The coin in its hand, the same one that had disappeared and reappeared before, was shining brighter than ever. It wasn't just back, it was pristine, almost new, as if freshly minted for me to see. I realized then that force would not protect me. I could not outmatch it. The nights grew worse. I began hearing tiny, deliberate movements, not just the clinking of coins, but scratching, shifting, tiny feet or claws dragging along the floor. Sometimes I thought I saw a figure hunched low, moving beneath my bed. My stomach knotted every time I dared to look, and the shadows seemed to recoil whenever I turned toward them. But one night, I forced myself. I crouched and peered under the bed, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A figure, small and hunched, counting tiny coins, its eyes hollow yet intelligent, staring directly at me. It moved impossibly fast, melting back into darkness before I could blink. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back, my mind racing, realizing this wasn't just a figurine. It was an entity, punishing me for touching, for taking, for owning what it wanted, guarded. The realization clawed at me. Every coin I had ever held, every small act of possession, might have been catalogued, marked, counted. I could not know how long it had been waiting, what rules it enforced, only that it was patient, precise, and merciless. I tried to block it out. I covered mirrors, turned off lights, sat in corners with my knees pulled to my chest, trying to convince myself that I could ignore it. But ignoring it didn't work. The apartment felt alive with anticipation, and every time I dared to breathe, I heard a faint metallic echo from the desk. Sometimes, the clinking coins were accompanied by whispers, low and unintelligible, like someone or something was chanting, counting, judging. One evening I noticed coins scattered across the floor, in places I had just cleaned hours earlier. They formed strange patterns, spiraling around furniture, tracing lines that led toward my bed. I felt the pressure build, a growing sense of dread pressing down on me. I was trapped in my own home, watched by something patient and unyielding. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the figurine had already claimed this place. It had marked it. There was no escape without paying a price. And then I realized something worse. It was multiplying. I saw a second figurine on my desk, identical in every detail, holding a coin just like the first. My heart stopped. I had no memory of placing it there. Panic clawed at my chest. The apartment was no longer a safe space, it was a trap. The figurines weren't just watching, they were waiting. The first one's eyes glimmered brighter, almost with satisfaction. And I understood then that my attempts to fight, to destroy, to run, were useless. It had me, completely, and it was patient. That night, the scratching returned, louder, closer, circling me as I lay frozen in bed. The clinking coins echoed in rhythm with my racing heartbeats. I wanted to flee, to scream, but I couldn't move. A shadow shifted in the corner of my room, a tiny, hunched shape that moved impossibly fast toward my bed. I felt its cold presence brush against me. My body froze. Its hollow eyes reflected mine, as if it had studied me for weeks, months, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, it whispered not with words, but with a sound that burrowed into my skull. A cold, deliberate counting of coins. I had no choice now. I belonged to it. I could no longer leave my apartment. Even walking to the corner store felt impossible, like stepping into a trap I could not escape. The figurines had multiplied. Every time I blinked, I saw more of them, tiny bronze shapes materializing in the corners, on shelves, even in places I knew I hadn't put them. Each held a coin in its hand, gleaming under the dim light. I stopped trying to understand how or why they moved in ways that defied logic. They didn't need me to watch. They thrived in shadows, patient and silent, marking their territory. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, all around me, crawling from the corners, moving beneath the bed, shifting along the walls. Their hollow eyes glinted in the dark, intelligent and cruel, calculating my fear. The clinking of coins followed me everywhere, louder at night, echoing through the apartment in rhythms I could not predict. It was deliberate, like a warning or a counting of my sins. I had taken, and now I was marked. The whispering started next. Low, unintelligible murmurs that came from every corner at once, soft and insistent, like a chant I could not escape. I tried to block it out, pressing my hands over my ears, but it burrowed into my skull, gnawing at my thoughts. The apartment no longer felt safe. Even the furniture seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking, subtle movements that made my skin crawl. The shadows thickened, growing dense and heavy as though alive, pressing down on me. I realized that the apartment itself was part of it. It had claimed this space, and I was trapped inside its rule. I began counting the coins, trying to make sense of the patterns they formed. They appeared in spirals, in circles, tracing paths I could not follow logically. Sometimes, they led to my bed, other times to the corners of the room. One night, I noticed a trail leading to the living room. I followed it cautiously, my hands trembling, expecting some terrible reveal. There, in the faint glow of a streetlight through the window, I saw dozens of figurines, identical, arranged in a perfect semicircle, coins in hand. They were waiting. For what? I did not know. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. The air grew colder, denser, and the shadows seemed to pulse with anticipation. I realized that this was no longer just a curse on MIT, was a test, and I had failed by taking what was not mine. The first figurine, the one I had brought home, stood slightly apart from the others. Its eyes glimmered brighter than the rest, focused entirely on me. I felt it judging, calculating the punishment I deserved. I could sense the others watching, silently complicit, their hollow eyes following my every movement. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of fear. I dared not touch the figurines, dared not move too quickly, for I was certain that any wrong motion would provoke their wrath. Every metallic clink of coins made my heart skip. I became aware of tiny movements under my bed again, like something crouched low, waiting. I could hear it breathing, soft and deliberate, the sound impossible to ignore. I started noticing the small, cruel details. Tiny scratches appeared on the floor, forming concentric circles around the bed, around the figurines, patterns that grew more complex with each night. I realized that they were marking me, enclosing me, preparing me for something I could not see. I tried reasoning, telling myself it was only a dream, only my mind exaggerating the shadows. But the cold pressure against my shoulder, the faint metallic scent in the air, told me otherwise, and then I saw it. Beneath the first figurine, a shadow moved differently from the rest. It shifted, crouched, and seemed almost human in its shape, counting coins with long, thin fingers that were impossible to be mine. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to look away. Its hollow eyes lifted, and I felt its gaze burn straight into my mind. It was patient, waiting, and I understood then that nothing I had tried running, hiding, destroying the figurine had mattered. It had me entirely. The whispering grew louder, forming a chant that I could not comprehend, but could feel in every bone. The figurines tilted slightly, moving as if leaning toward me, drawing me into the circle they had created. A chill crawled over my skin, and I realized with dread that there was no escaping. I belonged to them now, and they would wait as long as they needed, until the reckoning was complete. The last thing I saw that night, before exhaustion and terror overcame me, was the first figurine's eyes, brighter than all the others, glinting with a cruel intelligence. It lifted its tiny hand slowly, holding a coin that rolled toward me in the most deliberate way, stopping at my toes. I stared down, heart hammering, and read the single word engraved on it: return. I woke the next morning on the floor, the taste of copper thick in my mouth, the apartment eerily quiet. I blinked, disoriented, expecting the familiar clinking, the whispering, the shadows that had haunted me for weeks, but for the first time in days, there was silence. Relief washed over me, a fragile, fleeting feeling. Maybe it had ended. Maybe the figurines had finally left. I surveyed the apartment with trembling hands. The scattered coins were gone. The tiny scratches on the floor, the spirals and circles that had tracked my every movement, were gone. Even the figurines themselves were gone. The desk where the first one had sat was empty. I could not explain it. I wanted to believe that I had survived, that somehow, against all reason, it had released me. But then I saw the coin. It lay on the floor near my bed, glinting in the morning light. My chest tightened. I bent down, heart hammering, expecting a simple coin. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was not a coin at all. It was a small bronze face, impossibly detailed, frozen in terror. My own face, captured in bronze, staring up at me with wide, hollow eyes. The sense of recognition slammed into me, making my knees weak. This was me. I had become part of it, marked in a way I could not escape. I dropped to the floor, shaking. The apartment felt suddenly alive again, though I saw nothing. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, thicker, as if the space itself had absorbed my fear and fed on it. The whispering returned, soft and insistent, brushing against the edges of my mind. Not words, not understandable speech, but a cold, deliberate reminder that I had taken something that was not mine. I had stolen, and now, the debt had been claimed. I ran to the door, hoping to escape, but it would not open. The lock held fast, unyielding. Panic rose in my throat. The clinking of coins began again, louder than ever, echoing through the walls, through the floor, through the ceiling. I dropped to my knees, feeling the metallic vibrations under my fingertips. Every coin I had ever touched, every act of theft, however small, seemed to resonate in that sound. I realized then that I was trapped, bound by some invisible chain, unable to leave. And then I noticed movement from the window. My apartment faced the street, yet the sunlight showed nothing but quiet buildings and empty sidewalks. Yet there it was, a figurine, tiny, perched on the ledge outside, holding a coin in its hand. I felt my chest tighten in terror. The coin it held glimmered with the unmistakable image of my own face, frozen in bronze. My stomach churned as the realization hit me. It had followed me, even outside the apartment, even when I thought I was safe. The rules were simple. Once taken, it would never let go. I stumbled back, breath ragged, and my eyes caught movement in the shadows behind me. Dozens of figurines, identical, now filled the corners of the apartment. They hadn't left at all. They had been patient, waiting for the right moment. The first one's eyes gleamed brighter than the rest, fixed on me with a cruel intelligence I could not name. Its tiny hand lifted slowly. Another coin rolled from it, stopping at my feet. I looked down horrified and saw the engraving. Next, my mind raced. I had nowhere to run. Every instinct screamed to flee, to destroy, to do anything to break free, but I knew it was useless. The figurines were patient, endless, relentless. They counted, they judged, they waited, and now, it seemed, I was only one step in their ongoing reckoning. I felt a cold, creeping realization. The curse was not confined to the apartment, not confined to me. It would continue. Someone else would take the next coin, and the cycle would never end. I sank to the floor, trembling, my own face staring back at me from the bronze coin. The whispering grew louder, filling every corner, every shadow, until I could no longer distinguish it from my own heartbeat. And in the deepest part of my mind I heard it clearly. The warning, the decree, the truth: don't steal. I looked once more toward the window. The figurine outside had vanished, but I knew it was only waiting, watching, counting, patient and deep in my chest. I understood that it would never stop, and neither would it ever truly leave. I had survived, yes, but at a cost I could not escape. The debt remained, and one day it would claim the next victim. And as I sat there, frozen and shaking, I realized the most horrifying truth: I was already part of it.